The desert night swallowed sound the way it always had. Complete, absolute, but not tonight. Tonight the silence shattered under the thunder of 298 Harley-Davidson engines rolling down Route 66 like an iron river, their headlights cutting through the Arizona darkness like searchlights hunting for something lost. At the head of this steel parade rode a man who had no business being there. Jack Mercer, 67 years old, leather jacket hanging loose on shoulders that had once been broader, stronger, capable of carrying the weight of the world and the men who depended on him. His hands gripped the handlebars with the kind of certainty that comes only from a lifetime of holding on when letting go would have been easier. The bike beneath him was a 1997 Heritage Softail. Not the newest, not the fastest, but it was his, had been his for 25 years. The same bike he had ridden on the night everything changed. The same bike that had carried him away from death and towards something he had almost forgotten how to recognize. Hope. Behind him, 297 other machines roared in formation. Men who had chosen to be here. Men who had dropped everything. Jobs, families, comfort. All of it abandoned to ride through the night for a reason most of them did not fully understand. They only knew that when Jack Mercer called, you answered. And when Jack Mercer did not call, but the Brotherhood heard he needed you anyway, you came twice as fast. The town of Calvary Springs appeared on the horizon like a postcard from America's forgotten places. Population 3,000, 2 stoplights, 1 main street. The kind of town where everyone knew your name and half your business, whether you wanted them to or not. A place where time moved slower, where handshakes still meant something, where the diners served coffee in mugs that had been chipped and repaired more times than anyone could count. But tonight, Calvary Springs would remember this moment for the rest of its existence. The convoy slowed as they entered town engines, dropping to a predatory idle. Windows lit up along Main Street, curtains pulled back. Faces appeared in doorways, some curious, some frightened, all transfixed by the sight of nearly 300 motorcycles rolling through their streets like a mechanized army on a mission. At the end of Sycamore Lane stood a house that had seen better days. Wooden frame, paint peeling, porch sagging under the weight of decades. The kind of house that held memories in its walls the way a grave holds bones. Sacred, permanent, unmovable. On that porch stood a woman who looked like she had been carved from the same wood as the house itself. Dorothy Hargrove, 88 years old, white hair pulled back in a bun that had probably looked the same for 40 years. Hands that trembled not from fear, but from the simple reality of having lived long enough to see everything twice. She stood behind the screen door, one hand on the frame, watching the river of headlights approach. Her face showed no surprise, no relief, just a quiet kind of resignation that comes when you have been waiting for something so long you had almost convinced yourself it would never arrive. In front of her house stood a man who did not belong there. 40-ish, expensive suit that looked out of place in this neighborhood. Hair slicked back with too much product. The kind of smile that never reached the eyes. He held a clipboard like it was a weapon, pointing it at Dorothy's front door with the casual authority of someone who had never been told no and meant it. Mrs. Hargrove, he was saying, his voice carrying that particular tone of false patience that barely concealed contempt. This is your final notice. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, or we will proceed with legal enforcement of the court order. He never finished the sentence. The first motorcycle rolled to a stop 15 feet from Dorothy's front gate. Then another, then another, then 100 more filling the street, the yards, the empty lots, engines cutting off one by one until the night filled with a different kind of silence, the kind that comes right before lightning strikes. Jack Mercer climbed off his bike with the careful movements of a man who had learned to conserve energy, who had learned that every movement cost something now, and the bill was coming due faster than he would like. He walked forward, steady, deliberate, the way a man walks when he is done running from anything. The man with the clipboard turned, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion to something that might have been fear. Behind Jack, 297 bikers stood in silence, waiting, watching. I think Jack said, his voice quiet but carrying across the sudden stillness, like a stone dropped in still water. The lady said she needs more time. The clipboard man's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Who the hell are you? Jack did not answer immediately. He looked past the man, past the porch to where Dorothy stood behind the screen door. Their eyes met. Recognition flared in her face like a match struck in darkness. Jack, her voice cracked on his name. Jack Mercer. He nodded once. Yes, ma'am. I came back, like I promised. The clipboard man looked between them, trying to understand what was happening. Why the script had suddenly changed. Look, I don't know what this is, but this property is scheduled for immediate eviction, and any interference will be reported to law enforcement. Leave. The word came from behind Jack, a massive man with arms like tree trunks and a beard that could hide small animals. Duke Rawlins, who had ridden 800 miles in 18 hours to be here. Now. The clipboard man looked at the sea of leather and chrome and weathered faces, men who had seen things he could not imagine, men who had survived things he would never have to, men who had made a decision about which side of this line they stood on, and nothing would move them. He backed toward his car, hands up. This is not over. Mr. Kensington will hear about this. Tell Mr. Kensington. Jack interrupted, his voice still quiet, still calm, that Jack Mercer would like to have a conversation with him at his earliest convenience. The man got in his car and left rubber on the asphalt in his hurry to leave. Jack stood there for a moment, watching the taillights disappear. Then he turned and walked up the 3 steps to Dorothy's porch. Each step took effort. Each step cost something, but he made them anyway. Dorothy pushed open the screen door. In the yellow porch light, Jack could see how the years had changed her. Smaller now, frailer. The kind of fragile that comes not from weakness, but from having been strong for too long without rest. But her eyes were the same, sharp and clear and missing nothing the way they had been 25 years ago when she had looked at 3 strangers on her porch and seen through every wall they had built. You came back, she whispered. I gave you my word, ma'am. He removed his helmet, held it against his chest like a soldier standing at attention. 25 years ago, I said, if you ever needed anything, all you had to do was call. You did not call. But I heard anyway. She reached out one trembling hand and touched his face, her palm cool against his cheek. You are sick. It was not a question. Dorothy had always been able to see through people down to the truth they tried to hide even from themselves. Yes, ma'am, Jack admitted. I am. Then why are you here? You should be resting. You should be taking care of yourself. He covered her hand with his own, held it there for just a moment. This is exactly where I should be. Behind them, the sound of 297 motorcycles being kicked to silence. 297 men beginning to make camp in a town that would never forget this night. 297 reasons why some debts could never be paid, only honored. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. To understand why nearly 300 men rode through the night for one elderly woman they had never met, why Jack Mercer would spend his last strength on a fight that was not his to win, you have to go back. Back to another night, another winter, another version of Jack who did not know yet that sometimes the people you save end up saving you right back. 48 hours earlier, Jack's world had been much smaller and infinitely lonelier. The garage smelled like motor oil and yesterday's coffee. Jack sat on a rolling stool, an envelope in his hands, staring at words that refused to make sense no matter how many times he read them. Stage 4 adenocarcinoma, metastatic, limited treatment options available. Life expectancy without intervention 3 to 6 months. With aggressive treatment, possibly 12 to 18 months, though quality of life would be significantly impacted. The paper trembled slightly. Not from fear. Jack had stopped being afraid of death somewhere around his 3rd tour. His 2nd firefight. His first time holding a dying friend's hand and lying about how it was going to be okay. The trembling was from something else. Relief, maybe? Or just the body's way of acknowledging what the mind had known for months. The tightness in his chest that never eased. The cough that would not quit. The way breathing had become something he had to think about instead of something that just happened. He set the letter down on his workbench next to a carburetor he had been rebuilding for a kid who could not afford a real mechanic. The kid would have to find someone else now. There were things Jack would not finish. Projects left undone. Promises that would expire with him. The thought did not bother him as much as it should have. Jack had lived 67 years. 30 of them borrowed time he never should have had in the first place. When your entire platoon dies in the desert and you walk away without a scratch, you spend the rest of your life waiting for the universe to correct its accounting error. waiting for the bill to come due. Looked like it finally had. He walked to the small office area he had set up in the corner of the garage. On the wall hung a photograph, faded colors washed out by time and sunlight. Three men standing in front of a wooden house in the snow arms, around each other's shoulders, smiling, despite everything they had seen, everything they had lost. Jack recognized himself in the middle. Younger, harder, hollower. A man who had come back from war but left most of himself behind in the sand. To his left, Duke Rollins built like a bear, grinning like he had just heard the world's best joke. To his right, Preacher Nash, lean and serious, the kind of man who spoke in Bible verses and lived like every day was a test he was determined to pass. Behind them, a house, and in the window of that house, just barely visible, the silhouette of a woman and three small figures. Jack had kept this photograph for 25 years, carried it with him through 5 states and a dozen different apartments. It was the only picture he owned, the only proof that once on the worst night of his life, something good had happened. His phone rang. The sound jarred him back to the present. He checked the caller ID, Duke Rollins. Speak of the devil. Duke. Jack. Duke's voice was gravel and whiskey aged by hard living and harder choices. You sitting down? I am always sitting down these days. What is going on? A pause. Long enough to matter. Long enough for Jack to know this was not a social call. You remember Dorothy Hargrove? The name hit Jack like a physical thing. He actually took a step back, one hand reaching for the workbench to steady himself. Of course I remember. Why? She is in trouble. Bad trouble. Some real estate developer named Vance Kensington is trying to force her out of her house. Legal pressure, financial pressure, every kind of pressure. She has got 48 hours before they evict her. Jack closed his eyes, saw Dorothy's face the way it had been 25 years ago. Older than him even then, but strong. Certain. The kind of woman who opened her door to 3 dangerous-looking strangers on the worst night of the year and did not hesitate, did not question, did not judge. Is she okay? How is she doing? Another pause, this one heavier. Jack, she is 88 years old, and from what I hear, she is not doing great. Financially, health-wise, none of it. She is alone in that house trying to hold on to the last thing she has left. Jack opened his eyes, looked at the photograph on the wall, at the 3 men who had been saved by a woman who had no reason to save them, except that it was the right thing to do, at the house that had been shelter and sanctuary when they had needed it most. Where are you, Phoenix? But I can be on the road in 20 minutes. I figured you would want to know. Do not just know. Jack pulled his leather jacket off the hook by the door. I am going. Question is whether you are coming with me. He could hear Duke's grin through the phone. Brother, I was packed before I called you. Just wanted to make sure you were still the man I thought you were. I am a dead man walking, Duke. But I have got 3 to 6 months left, and I will be damned if I waste them sitting in this garage waiting for the end. That is what I figured. Preacher is already on his way from New Mexico. Called him right before I called you. We meet at the usual spot. Yeah, sunrise tomorrow. Jack looked at the photograph one more time. And Duke, call anyone else you think might want to ride. This is not just about Dorothy. It is about paying debts that cannot be paid any other way. Copy that. See you at sunrise, brother. The line went dead. Jack stood there for a moment, phone in hand, feeling something he had not felt in months, maybe years. Purpose. He walked through his garage looking at all the things he had accumulated. Tools, parts, projects half finished. A life measured in mechanical problems solved and engines brought back from the dead. None of it mattered. None of it would matter in 3 months when his lungs finally gave out and the borrowed time ran dry. But this mattered. He grabbed his go-bag from the closet. Always packed, always ready. Old habits from the service that never quite died. Extra clothes, basic supplies. And at the bottom, wrapped in an oilcloth, the Colt 1911 he had carried since the Gulf. Never fired it outside of a range since he had come home. Hoped he never would have to, but hope had never been a strategy. Jack locked up the garage, left a note for the kid about the carburetor, told him where to find someone who could finish the job, climbed onto his Harley and felt the familiar weight settle around him like an old coat that still fit despite everything. The engine turned over on the first try. Always did. He had maintained this bike the way some men maintain their marriages. With patience, attention, and the understanding that neglect would cost you everything when you needed it most. As he rolled out of the garage and onto the empty street, Jack thought about that night 25 years ago. The night he had planned to die. The night Dorothy Hargrove had opened her door and, without knowing it, given him a reason to live. The desert stars were just starting to come out. Same as they had been that Christmas Eve in 1997. Same ski, same stars. Different man looking up at them. Or maybe not so different. Maybe that version of Jack, the one who had survived when he should not have, who had been looking for a way out but found a way forward instead, maybe that version had been waiting all this time for the chance to pay back what could never be repaid. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark and full of promise. Behind him, his garage stood silent, his life's work, his solitary existence, everything he had built in the years since the war. He did not look back. Christmas Eve, 1997. The cold was the kind that killed, slowly, steadily, the way hypothermia works when you are too tired to shiver anymore and sleep starts to seem like a reasonable option. Jack Mercer was 42 years old and he had come to the desert to die. His hands were numb on the handlebars of his Harley. His breath came in white clouds that disappeared into the darkness. The temperature had dropped to -15 and the wind cut through his leather like it was not even there. Perfect. He had ridden out past the last gas station, past the last street light, past the last place anyone would think to look for him. The gun in his jacket pocket had started to feel heavy 3 hours ago. Now it felt inevitable. Jack had tried. God knows he had tried. 6 years since coming back from the Gulf. 6 years of therapy that did not work. Medications that made him feel like someone else. Jobs that could not hold his attention because nothing civilian mattered the way things had mattered when life and death hung on every decision. 6 years of waking up wondering why he got to wake up when 37 better men had not. The faces came back at night. Always at night. Jensen, who had had a kid on the way. Martinez, who could make anyone laugh even when the situation was beyond hope. Corporal Williams, 19 years old, who had asked Jack 3 hours before the ambush if he thought they would make it home for Christmas. Jack had said yes. He had lied. They had all lied to each other right up until the moment the world exploded. And the only truth that mattered was that some people lived and some people did not. And there was no reason, no logic, no justice in who ended up on which side of that line. He had been the senior NCO. He had made the call to take the faster route. He had been the one who survived to write the letters to 37 families explaining that their sons, brothers, fathers, husbands had died serving their country, that it had meant something, that they had been heroes. More lies. They died because Jack had made the wrong call. They died because he had been impatient, because he had wanted to get back to base before Christmas, because he had thought he knew better than the intelligence reports about insurgent activity in that sector. And now 6 years later, after trying every way he could think of to make the guilt stop, to make the faces go away, to find some reason to justify taking up space in a world that clearly had no use for him, Jack had finally accepted the simple truth. He was done. The engine on his Harley chose that moment to cough, sputter, and die. Jack coasted to a stop on the side of Route 66 miles from anywhere and almost laughed. Even his own bike was telling him it was time. He climbed off his legs, stiff from the cold. Tried the ignition. Nothing. Checked the fuel line. Frozen. Of course it was frozen. He had been riding in -15-degree weather for 3 hours. The irony was not lost on him. He had come out here to end it on his own terms, and now he was going to freeze to death on the side of the road like some unlucky traveler in a cautionary tale. Maybe that was fitting. He sat down with his back against the bike, pulled his jacket tighter, even though it would not help, and watched his breath form clouds in front of his face. Each exhale a little smaller than the last. Each inhale a little harder. This was it then. Quiet. Slow. The desert taking back what the war had failed to claim. He closed his eyes, and then heard the sound of engines approaching. 2 motorcycles appeared out of the darkness like mechanical angels. They slowed when they saw Jack pulled up alongside him. 2 men climbed off their faces, hidden by helmets and winter gear. Jesus Christ, one of them said, pulling off his helmet. Duke Rawlins, though, Jack did not know his name yet. Big man, kind face. The kind of guy you would want next to you in a fight. Brother, what are you doing out here? Jack did not answer immediately. What could he say? I came here to die, but my bike broke down. The second man removed his helmet, thinner, harder, eyes that had seen things. Preacher Nash, we need to get him warm. Now, hypothermia is already setting in. I am fine, Jack managed through numb lips. The hell you are. Duke grabbed Jack's arm, pulled him to his feet with a kind of strength that did not ask permission. There is a town about 10 miles back. We passed it. We are taking you there. Do not need help. Preacher got in Jack's face close enough that Jack could see the scars on his cheek, the hardness in his expression. Listen to me, brother. I do not know what you are doing out here. I do not know what you are running from. But you are not dying on this road tonight. Not on my watch, you understand? Something in Preacher's voice made it clear this was not a request. These two strangers had decided Jack was worth saving, and they were going to save him whether he wanted it or not. They tied Jack's bike to the back of Duke's and made Jack ride behind Preacher holding on while they headed back towards civilization. Jack did not have the strength to argue, did not have the strength to do anything except hold on and feel his body slowly starting to register just how close he had come to the edge. The town appeared like a mirage, small, quiet, Christmas lights strung on houses that looked like they had been standing since before the interstate was built. Everything closed for the holiday. Everything dark except for the occasional lit window showing families inside, safe and warm and together. They knocked on 7 doors, 7 different houses, asked if there was somewhere 3 stranded bikers could wait out the night, get warm, maybe use a phone. 7 doors shut in their faces. Polite but firm. It is Christmas Eve. We do not know you. We cannot help. Sorry. Jack felt each rejection like a confirmation of what he had already known. The world did not have room for men like him. Men who had broken something inside themselves and could not figure out how to fix it. The 8th house was at the end of a street that dead-ended into desert. Small, wooden, paint peeling, porch sagging. The kind of house that had given up trying to impress anyone and just focused on standing one more day. Duke knocked, waited, knocked again. The door opened. An older woman stood there backlit by the warm glow of a single lamp. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. White hair in a practical bun, worn dress, hands that showed a lifetime of work. But her eyes held a sharpness that noticed everything and forgave most of it. She looked at the 3 men on her porch, took in their leather jackets, their long hair, their road-worn faces, the kind of men respectable people cross the street to avoid. "Help you?" she asked, her voice carrying the accent of someone who had lived in the Southwest their whole life. "Ma'am," Preacher said, removing his helmet and holding it like he was in church. "We are sorry to bother you on Christmas Eve. Our friend's bike broke down about 10 miles out. We are just looking for somewhere warm to wait until morning. Maybe use a phone to call for a tow." The woman studied them. Jack could see her making calculations, assessing risk. They were strangers. They were bikers. It was late. She was alone. Every rational reason to say no. She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said simply. "It is too cold to be outside," just like that. No interrogation, no conditions, just an open door and an invitation to step out of the cold. The 3 men did not move immediately, too surprised by the simple generosity. Well, the woman smiled, a small quirk of her lips. "You coming in, or are you going to stand there catching your death?" They went in. The inside of the house was small but immaculate, everything worn but cared for. Furniture that had been repaired instead of replaced, rugs that had been mended, the kind of poverty that carried dignity in every patched seam and polished surface. And there in the living room, 3 children sat on a couch that was too small for them. 2 boys and a girl between 7 and 11 years old wearing pajamas that did not quite fit, staring at the 3 strange men with wide eyes. "Do not mind them," the woman said, bustling toward the kitchen. "They are shy, lost their parents a few months back. House fire. I am their neighbor and well, nobody else would take them, so I did. You boys hungry? I have got some soup I can heat up." Jack stood frozen in the doorway, taking it all in. This woman, clearly not wealthy, clearly struggling herself, had taken in 3 orphan children. And now she was opening her door to 3 strange men who looked like they had been spat out by the road. "Ma'am," Jack found his voice rough and broken as it was. "We cannot take your food. We will just warm up and be on our way." She turned, fixed him with a look that reminded him of every schoolteacher who had ever told him to sit down and be quiet. Young man, when someone offers you hospitality, you accept it graciously. Now sit down before you fall down. You look half frozen. Duke grinned. Yes, ma'am. They sat. The woman brought soup. The children slowly relaxed, especially when Preacher pulled a deck of cards from his jacket and started showing them simple magic tricks. Name is Dorothy Hargrove, the woman said, settling into a chair that had probably been her husband's once. Dot to friends. That is Ethan, Nolan, and Savannah. The three children's hey, Sheely. I am Duke. That is Preacher. And the quiet one there is Jack. Dorothy looked at Jack with eyes that saw deeper than he was comfortable with. He felt stripped bare under that gaze, every lie he had ever told himself suddenly transparent. You boys been on the road long. Long enough, Duke said. Where you headed? Preacher glanced at Jack before answering. Nowhere particular. Just riding. Dorothy nodded like that made perfect sense. Like three bikers showing up on Christmas Eve with no destination was the most natural thing in the world. Well, she said, standing, I have only got one bedroom with a heater that works. You boys can have it. The kids and I will be fine out here. Absolutely not, Jack said, speaking for the first time since they had entered. We are not taking your warm room. It is not a discussion, young man. I have got 3 growing children here. They can keep each other warm just fine on this couch. You 3 need the heat more than we do. And before you argue, she held up a hand. Remember what I said about accepting hospitality graciously? They tried to argue anyway. Failed. Dorothy Hargrove had clearly been winning arguments since before any of them were born. Jack, Duke, and Preacher ended up in the small bedroom. Single space heater glowing orange in the corner. They gave the lone bed to Jack, who looked like he might collapse at any moment. Duke and Preacher made do with sleeping bags on the floor, but Jack could not sleep. Around midnight, he got up moving quietly so as not to wake the others. Walked to the bedroom door, opened it just a crack. In the living room, Dorothy sat in her chair wrapped in a thin blanket. The 3 children were asleep on the couch piled together for warmth under every blanket and coat Dorothy owned. And Dorothy was singing, softly, carefully, an old lullaby Jack's mother used to sing to him. You are my sunshine. Her voice was quiet, pitched just loud enough for the children to hear in their sleep. A promise that they were not alone, that someone was watching over them, that morning would come and they would be okay. The oldest boy, Ethan, stirred, opened his eyes. Grandma Dot. His voice was small, scared. Are you cold? Dorothy smiled and reached over to smooth his hair. I am just fine, sweetheart. You go back to sleep. Why are you nice to us? Ethan asked. Nobody else wanted us. Why did you? Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of a truth that children could somehow always recognize. Because I know what it is like to be alone, Ethan. I'd lost my husband last year. I know what it feels like when the world gets dark and quiet, and you are not sure if morning is ever going to come. And I decided that if I could not make my own world brighter, I could at least make sure you kids did not have to feel that darkness. You are not alone, baby. Not as long as I am breathing. Ethan closed his eyes. Okay, Grandma Dot. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. Jack closed the door, walked back to the bed, sat down on the edge, put his face in his hands. The gun in his jacket pocket suddenly felt obscene. Wrong. An insult to everything he had just witnessed. This woman, struggling, grieving, barely making it herself. She had opened her door to strangers, had taken in children no one else wanted, had given away her only warm room on the coldest night of the year, and sat in the freezing living room singing lullabies to make sure 3 orphaned kids knew they were loved. And what had Jack done? He had come out to the desert to throw away the life she was fighting so hard to preserve in these children. He had been ready to waste what she would give anything to give these kids. Time, presence, someone to count on. Shame hit him like a physical blow. He thought about the 37 men who died in the desert. Thought about how every one of them would have done anything for just one more day. One more hour, one more chance to hold their kids or call their parents or just watch the sun come up. And here Jack was, healthy enough to ride a motorcycle hundreds of miles, strong enough to survive what had killed so many, alive enough to make a difference in the world if he would just see that being alive was not about deserving it. It was about what you did with it. He pulled the gun from his jacket, held it in his hands, felt its weight. Then he wrapped it in a shirt and shoved it to the bottom of his pack, buried under everything else. When morning came, Jack was the first one awake. He dug into his saddlebag and pulled out everything of value he owned. $5,000 in cash. His emergency fund. The money he had been saving for a funeral he had thought would be coming much sooner. He left it on the kitchen table, weighed down by the salt shaker, with a note written on the back of a receipt. Mrs. Hargrove, thank you for saving my life. This is not payment. You cannot pay for what you did. This is just me trying to make sure those kids have the Christmas they deserve. And maybe fixing that heater. You and those children are the best thing I have seen in 6 years. Do not ever think the world does not need you. Jack Mercer. U.S. Army, retired. He left his phone number at the bottom. Thought about crossing it out, left it anyway. The three bikers left at sunrise after Dorothy made them breakfast she could not afford and insisted they take coffee for the road. She stood on her porch waving while three sleepy children peering around her legs, all of them bundled in blankets against the cold. Jack looked back once, saw Dorothy watching them go, saw her wave. He waved back. And then he rode away from that house with something he had not carried in 6 years. A reason to wake up tomorrow. A reason to keep trying. A reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, being the one who survived meant he had a responsibility to do something with all this borrowed time. 25 years later, riding through the Arizona night toward that same house, toward that same woman who had saved his life without ever knowing it, Jack thought about that morning. Thought about how one act of kindness had changed everything. Thought about how now it was his turn to be the one who opened the door. His turn to say, come in, when the world was saying, stay out. His turn to prove that what Dorothy had given him had not been wasted. Behind him, 297 engines roared. Ahead of him, a woman who had saved his life stood on her porch watching the impossible sight of an army arriving to save hers. And Jack Mercer, 67 years old, 3 months left to live, felt more alive than he had in decades. This was what he had been saved for. This was why he had walked away from that desert all those years ago. This was the debt that could never be repaid, only honored. And honor it he would, until his last breath. The sun rose over Calvary Springs the way it had for 100 years, indifferent to the change that had arrived in the night. But the town woke to a sight it would talk about for generations. 298 motorcycles lined every street within 3 blocks of Dorothy Hargrove's house. Organized, orderly, a temporary city of chrome and leather that had appeared like an occupying army. Except this army asked permission, paid for everything, and helped old ladies carry their groceries. Jack stood on Dorothy's porch in the early morning light, coffee cup in hand, watching his brothers set up camp with military precision. Tents in organized rows, cooking stations, first aid area, communications hub. These were not just bikers. They were veterans, men who had learned organization under fire and never forgotten it. Duke approached 2 more cups of coffee in his massive hands. He handed one to Jack, kept the other for himself. Media is starting to show up, Duke said, nodding toward a news van parking at the end of the block. Local station out of Phoenix. Probably will not be the last. Jack sipped his coffee. Tasted like Dorothy had made it, which meant it was strong enough to strip paint and sweet enough to qualify as dessert. Let them come. We are not hiding. Nope, Duke grinned. We are giving them the best story they will cover all year. 300 bikers show up to protect elderly widow from predatory developer. Hell, they will probably give us our own movie. Despite everything, Jack smiled. We are a little rough for that. Speak for yourself. I am delightful. The screen door opened behind them. Dorothy emerged, moving with the careful steps of someone whose bones remembered every year they had carried her. She had changed into a fresh dress pinned up the same way it probably had been for 50 years. You boys planning to stand on my porch all day? Or are you going to come inside and have a proper breakfast? Ma'am, you do not need to cook for us. We have got supplies we can manage. Jack Mercer. I have been cooking breakfast in this house since before you were born. I am not about to stop now just because I have got an army in my front yard. Now get inside before the eggs get cold. Jack and Duke exchanged looks. When Dorothy Hargrove gave an order, you followed it. Some things never changed. Inside the house smelled like bacon and fresh coffee and something baking in the oven. The kitchen was small, barely room for two people, but Dorothy moved through it with the efficiency of someone who had learned to make do with less and still produce miracles. 3 place settings at the table. Jack sat where Dorothy pointed, noticed the chair was positioned so he had a clear view of both the front and back doors. Old habits. She had been married to a soldier once. She understood. "Where is Preacher?" Dorothy asked, setting down a plate of eggs and bacon that could feed a small battalion. Organizing the perimeter, Duke said, "Man takes security seriously. Always did." Dorothy poured coffee, her hands steadier this morning than they had been last night. Having purpose did that to people. Gave them something to be strong for. "I remember he used to check all the locks on my doors before you boys left. Made sure the windows were secure." "Good man." "Yes, ma'am, they are all good men." Dorothy sat down with her own modest plate, bowed her head, briefly lips moving in silent prayer. Jack and Duke waited respectfully. Neither man particularly religious, but both understanding that some rituals demanded reverence. So Dorothy said, looking up at Jack with those eyes that never missed a thing, "You want to tell me what is really going on? Why you are here, and do not say it is just to help an old woman keep her house." Jack set down his fork. Outside, he could hear the sound of his brothers moving around, setting up, preparing for whatever came next. 297 men who had dropped everything to be here. "I am dying," he said simply. No point in dancing around it. Dorothy deserved the truth. "Lung cancer. 3 to 6 months, they tell me. Maybe less given how I have been feeling lately." Dorothy's expression did not change. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Her skin was paper thin, marked with age spots and the scars of a life spent working. But her grip was firm. "I am sorry, son. Do not be. I have lived longer than I had any right to. Longer than better men got to." He turned his hand over, held hers gently. "But when Duke called and told me you were in trouble, it was the first time in months I felt like I had a reason to get up in the morning. So if anything, I should thank you, again." "What do you mean again, ma'am?" "That night 25 years ago, I did not come to your door looking for shelter from the cold. I came to that desert to die. I had a gun in my pocket and a plan to make sure I did not see another sunrise. But then you opened that door. You let 3 dangerous-looking strangers into your home. You gave us your only warm room. And you sat in that freezing living room, singing to 3 kids who had lost everything, making sure they knew they were not alone." Jack's voice roughened. "You saved my life that night, Mrs. Hargrove. Not just from the cold, from myself, from giving up. You showed me what strength looks like, what grace looks like, what it means to keep going even when you have got every reason to quit. So no, I am not here just to help you keep your house. I am here because you gave me 25 years I would not have had. And if I have only got a few months left, I am going to spend them making sure you get to stay in the home you fought so hard to keep." Dorothy's eyes were wet. She squeezed his hand once hard, then let go and dabbed at her face with her napkin. "You always were dramatic," she said, but her voice was gentle. "Sitting out there on Christmas Eve like some tragic hero. I just did what any decent person would do." "But most people did not," Duke interjected quietly. "We knocked on 7 doors before yours, ma'am. 7 people who had every reason to help and did not. You were the 8th, the only one who said yes. Then they should be ashamed of themselves." Dorothy started clearing plates even though no one was done eating. Movement for the sake of movement. "You do not turn away people in need. I do not care what they look like or what you think they might be. You help. That is what being human means." The front door opened. Preacher entered, removing his riding gloves with the methodical precision he brought to everything. He saw Dorothy and his face softened in a way it rarely did for anyone else. "Mrs. Hargrove." He crossed to her, bent down and kissed her cheek with a formality that belonged to another era. "You are looking well. You are a terrible liar, Preacher Nash, but I appreciate the effort. Sit down. I will get you a plate." "Already ate, ma'am, but thank you." Preacher turned to Jack. "We need to talk, outside." Jack stood, followed Preacher onto the porch. Duke came too. The 3 of them stood in a line looking out at the organized chaos of their temporary encampment. "Kensington's people are watching," Preacher said without preamble. 3 cars parked in strategic positions around the perimeter. "They are taking photos, documenting everything. My guess is they are looking for any excuse to call in law enforcement claim we are violating some ordinance. We are not, Duke said. I checked. We have got permits for the camping. We are on public land or property where we have secured permission. We are not blocking roads, not creating public hazards. Everything is by the book. Does not mean they will not try to twist it. Preacher pulled out his phone, showed them a photo he had taken. A man in an expensive suit standing beside a black Mercedes, a telephoto camera lens pointed at Dorothy's house. That is not just surveillance, that is preparation for a legal battle. Jack studied the photo. The man was probably mid-40s, too well-dressed for this neighborhood, too comfortable in his expensive car. The kind of man who had never known what it meant to go without, to struggle, to fight for every inch of ground. Vance Kensington himself, Jack asked. No, just one of his people. But Kensington knows we are here. Question is, what is he going to do about it? The answer came faster than expected. A convoy of police cars rolled down Main Street, lights flashing, but no sirens. 6 vehicles. Enough to make a statement without starting a panic. They stopped at the perimeter of the encampment, and officers emerged with the careful posture of men who were not sure if this was a routine call or something that could go sideways fast. The lead officer was in his 50s, thick around the middle with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades mediating small-town disputes. His nameplate read, Sheriff Tanner. He approached the porch where Jack, Duke, and Preacher stood. His hand rested on his belt, close to his weapon, but not threatening. Professional. Wary. I am Sheriff Boyd Tanner, he said. Which one of you is in charge here? We do not really work that way, Sheriff Jack said. But I am the one who called everyone here. Name is Jack Mercer. Mr. Mercer. The sheriff's eyes flicked on over the 3 men taking in the leather, the tattoos, the bearing of men who had seen combat. I am going to need you to explain what is going on here. I got a call from Vance Kensington's attorney saying there is an armed militia occupying private property. We are not armed, we are not on private property, and we are definitely not a militia. We are just citizens exercising our right to peaceful assembly. Is there a law we are breaking? Sheriff Tanner shifted his weight. I am going to need to verify that you have got proper permits for this kind of gathering. Of course. Duke pulled a folder from inside his jacket, handed it over. Camping permits, assembly permits, property owner permissions from everyone who is letting us park on their land, fire safety compliance, health department notifications. We have dotted every I and crossed every T, Sheriff. We are not here to cause trouble. The sheriff flipped through the documents, his expression growing more puzzled with each page. This is thorough. We have done this before, Preacher said. Most of us are veterans. We know how to follow regulations. Veterans. Tanner's demeanor shifted slightly, the weariness receding a fraction. What branch Army? Mostly, Jack said. Some Marines, few Navy. We are bikers, Sheriff, but we are also Americans who served our country. We are not here to intimidate anyone. We are here to support Mrs. Hargrove. On cue, Dorothy pushed through the screen door carrying a tray with coffee cups and what looked like fresh-baked muffins. She had clearly been listening to the entire conversation. Boyd Tanner, is that you harassing my guests? She set the tray down on the porch railing with more force than necessary. I have known you since you were in diapers. Your mother and I were in the same church group for 30 years. Now you are going to stand there and tell me who I can and cannot have on my property. The sheriff actually blushed. Mrs. Hargrove, I am not harassing anyone. I am just doing my job. We got a complaint about Vance Kensington being upset that someone is finally standing up to him. Dorothy crossed her arms. That man has been terrorizing me for months, Boyd. Threatening letters, middle-of-the-night phone calls, having his people bang on my door at all hours. Where were you when I needed the police? Tanner had the grace to look uncomfortable. Ma'am, those complaints were investigated. Investigated and dismissed, you mean? Because the Kensington family has money and connections, and I am just an old woman nobody cares about. Dorothy's voice hardened. These men showed up when nobody else would. They are not breaking any laws. They are just making sure I am safe. If that is a crime, then maybe this town has bigger problems than I thought. A deputy approached from one of the other cars, younger, late 20s, the kind of earnest face that still believed in justice and fairness. His nameplate read Harding. Sheriff Deputy Harding said quietly, I have walked the perimeter. Everything is in order. They are not blocking roads, not creating hazards. Honestly, sir, they are probably the most organized group I have ever seen. They have even got a designated firewatch rotation. Tanner looked between Dorothy, the three bikers, his deputy, and the sea of leather-clad men watching this interaction with alert calm. No hostility, no aggression, just 297 men standing ready to defend an old woman's right to keep her home. The sheriff sighed, handed the folder back to Duke. Looks like everything is in order, but I am going to be checking back regularly. Any violations, any problems, and you are all going to have to leave. Understood, crystal clear, Sheriff Jack said. We are not here to cause problems. We are here to prevent them. Tanner nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. Mrs. Hargrove, if you need anything, you call the station directly. I will, Boyd. Thank you. The police cars pulled away, and Jack watched them go with a mix of relief and concern. They had passed the first test. But Vance Kensington would not stop just because the police had not found a reason to shut them down. This was just the beginning. As if summoned by the thought, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up across the street from Dorothy's house. The door opened and a man stepped out who could only be Vance Kensington. Mid-40s, expensive suit that probably cost more than Dorothy's monthly income. Hair perfect, smile practiced. The kind of man who had learned early that money could solve any problem, and if it could not, you just had not spent enough yet. He stood beside his car, making no move to approach, just observing, making his presence known. A psychological tactic, showing he was not intimidated, showing he could show up whenever he wanted. Jack met his eyes across the distance. Neither man looked away. This was the enemy then, not some faceless corporation or distant developer. This man, standing there in his $1,000 suit, who had decided Dorothy Hargrove's home was worth less than his profit margin. But then Vance did something unexpected. He looked past Jack to the porch where Dorothy had come back outside to collect her coffee tray. Their eyes met, and Vance's expression changed. The smooth confidence cracked, and something raw pushed through. Something older, darker, personal. He called out, his voice carrying across the quiet street. You know why I am here, Mrs. Hargrove. Do not pretend to be innocent. Dorothy froze. Her hands tightened on the tray. For just a moment, Jack saw something flicker across her face that he had never expected to see there. Something closer to guilt than fear. Then it was gone, replaced by the iron composure she wore like armor. I do not know what you are talking about, Mr. Kensington. I am just an old woman trying to keep her home. Vance stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, made a call while maintaining eye contact with Dorothy. Deliberate, provocative. Then he got back in his car and drove away. That was a message, Preacher said. Yeah. Jack watched the Mercedes disappear around the corner. He is telling us he is not scared. He has got resources. He has got time. But he does not know what we have got, Duke said. What is that? Nothing left to lose. But Jack was not thinking about Vance's resources or his time. He was thinking about the look on Dorothy's face when Vance had spoken to her. The flicker of guilt. The way her hands had tightened. The words that had sounded less like a threat and more like an accusation. Do not pretend to be innocent. What did Dorothy Hargrove know that she had not told them? Inside the house through the window, Jack could see Dorothy washing dishes, her movements efficient and practiced. A woman who had spent her whole life taking care of others, who had opened her door to strangers when no one else would, who deserved to spend her final years in peace. But there was something else there now, a question that had not existed before Vance Kensington opened his mouth, a shadow that hung over everything like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. That evening, after the camp had settled into its nighttime routine and the desert sky had filled with more stars than seemed reasonable, Dorothy called Jack into the kitchen. She sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The look on her face was one Jack recognized from soldiers who had carried a secret long enough that the weight of it had become part of their skeleton. Close the door, she said. He did. Sit down. He did that too. Dorothy stared at her tea for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, stripped of the iron certainty she wore like armor. I have not been honest with you, Jack. Not completely. Not about everything. Jack waited. He had learned a long time ago that the most important thing you could give someone who was about to tell the truth was silence. Those children, Dorothy said, Ethan and Nolan and Savannah, I did not just happen to take them in after their parents died. I knew their father, Thomas Holloway. He worked for a construction company owned by Warren Kensington. That is Vance's father. He was also the sheriff of this county back then. Jack felt the temperature in the room shift, something fundamental changing in the air between them. Thomas came to see me in the summer of 1997. Dorothy continued. 3 months before the fire, he was scared. He had found something at work. Financial records that showed Warren Kensington was stealing from his own company. $2 million over 5 years, funneling it into private accounts. Thomas did not know what to do. He did not trust the local police because the sheriff was the one doing the stealing. He did not know who to turn to. Why, you, Jack asked? Because I had been his Sunday school teacher when he was a boy. Because his mother and I had been friends before she passed. Because in a town this small, when you need someone you can trust, you go to the person who never turned anyone away. Dorothy opened a drawer, pulled out a small key, held it in her palm like it was a live grenade. Thomas gave me a box. Documents, copies of the financial records, receipts, everything he had found. He said if anything happened to him, I should make sure the right people saw it. I thought he was being dramatic. I thought he was overreacting. Her voice broke. 3 months later, his house burned down with him and his wife inside. And I knew it was not an accident. I knew Warren Kensington had killed them to protect his secrets. And I knew that the box Thomas had given me was the only proof. Jack's blood went cold. You have had evidence of their murder for 25 years. Dorothy's eyes met his, filled with tears and something far worse than grief. 25 years of guilt that had eaten her alive from the inside. I was afraid, Jack. God help me, I was afraid. I had 3 children to protect. 3 children whose parents had already been killed for knowing too much. If I came forward, if I showed that evidence to anyone, Warren Kensington would have come for me. And for them. So I did the only thing I could think of. I reported Warren for harassment. Enough to get him investigated, enough to get him out of power, but not enough to expose the murder, not enough to risk those children's lives. She set the key down on the table. I let a murderer walk free to protect 3 children, and I have lived with that choice every single day since. Every single day wondering if I did the right thing, wondering if Thomas and his wife deserved more than my fear. Jack looked at the key, at this woman who had carried a burden heavier than anything he had ever shouldered, who had made an impossible choice and lived with the consequences in silence for a quarter of a century. Where is the box now? Dorothy almost smiled. And in that almost smile, Jack saw something he had not expected, something sharper than grief, something that had been planning for this day longer than anyone knew. That is the thing, Jack. I am old. But I am not stupid. I knew this day would come. Knew that someday either Warren or his son would come back to finish what they started. So I did not just hide the box, I made copies. 3 sets of copies, one in a safe deposit box at the First National Bank in Phoenix under a name only I know. One with a lawyer in Tucson who has instructions to release it if anything happens to me. And one in a sealed envelope at the offices of the Phoenix Tribune with a letter explaining everything to be opened if I die or lose my home. She pushed the key across the table to Jack. That box under the floorboard in the spare room. That is real, but it is also bait. If Vance sends someone to steal it thinking he has destroyed the only evidence, he will be wrong. He will be very, very wrong. Jack stared at her, at this 88-year-old woman who had spent 25 years building a trap so patient and so thorough that the man who wanted to destroy her had walked right into it without ever knowing. You planned this. I survived this. There is a difference. I did not want any of this, but I knew it was coming, and I was not going to let those children down. Not again. Not ever again. Jack picked up the key, felt its weight, such a small thing to hold so much power. Does Vance know about the copies? No. He thinks the only evidence is in that box. That is why he wants my house so badly. It is not just revenge, though it is that too. He knows his father told Thomas about the evidence. He has spent years wondering if Thomas told anyone. And when he started buying up properties in this neighborhood, it was not just development. He was searching, going through every house he bought looking for the box. And your house is the last one. My house is the last one. Dorothy nodded. And I am the last person who knows the truth. When I am gone, when this house is gone, he thinks the secret dies with it. But it does not. No, it does not, because I made sure of that. Because those three children deserved a future built on truth, not silence. Jack sat back in his chair. Dorothy Hargrove was not a helpless victim. She was a woman who had fought the longest, quietest war imaginable. And she had been winning it one day at a time for 25 years. We need to tell them, Jack said. Ethan and Nolan and Savannah. They deserve to know. I know. Dorothy's voice cracked. I have wanted to tell them for years. But how do you tell three children that their parents were murdered? How do you explain that the woman who raised them kept that secret to protect them? How do you look them in the eye and say, I chose your safety over your parents' justice? You tell them the truth. And you let them decide whether to forgive you. That is all any of us can do. Dorothy reached across the table and took his hand. The same gesture she had made 25 years ago when she touched his face on the porch and saw through every wall he had built. Will you be there when I tell them? Yes, ma'am, I will be right there. She squeezed his hand. Then she stood, straightened her dress, and put on the mask of strength she had been wearing for a quarter of a century. Tomorrow, she said, we will tell him tomorrow. Tonight, let an old woman have one more night of peace before the storm. Jack watched her go, watched her shuffle down the hallway to her bedroom, smaller, with every step carrying a weight that would have broken anyone else. He sat alone in Dorothy's kitchen, holding a key that could unlock 25 years of buried truth, and thought about the nature of courage. He had seen courage in war, had seen men charge into gunfire, throw themselves on grenades, carry wounded brothers through hell itself. But he had never seen anything braver than what Dorothy Hargrove had done. She had taken 3 orphan children into her home, knowing that the people who had killed their parents might come for her next. She had built a life out of love and fear in equal measure. She had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. And she had done it all alone, without help, without recognition, without anyone knowing the war she had been fighting in silence. The desert stars burned overhead. The camp was quiet. 297 men slept the sleep of warriors at rest, trusting the watch to keep them safe. And in a small bedroom at the end of the hall, Dorothy Hargrove lay awake in the darkness, waiting for the morning that would change everything. The morning when the silence would finally break and the truth, patient and relentless, would step into the light after 25 years in shadow. The decision of when to tell Ethan, Nolan, and Savannah about their parents weighed on Jack heavier than the cancer. Heavier than the exhaustion that made every breath feel like lifting weights. He found them at sunrise, sitting on Dorothy's back porch with coffee cups and the tired eyes of people who had been up all night working. Savannah's legal papers were spread across a makeshift table. Nolan's laptop glowed in the early light. Ethan sat between them, the gravitational center, holding his siblings together the way he probably had since they were children. Dorothy stood in the doorway behind Jack. She had dressed carefully this morning, her best dress, hair pinned with more precision than usual. The way a woman prepares when she knows she is about to face the hardest moment of her life and wants to meet it with whatever dignity she has left. We need to talk, Dorothy said. Something in her voice made all 3 of them look up. This was her truth to tell, her burden to lay down. Jack was just there to make sure she did not have to carry it alone. Ethan set down his coffee cup with the careful precision of a surgeon preparing for bad news. What is it? Grandma Dorothy pulled up a chair. Jack stood behind her, one hand resting on the back of her seat, close enough so she could feel his presence. No, she was not alone. Your parents, Dorothy began, then stopped, swallowed, started again. Your parents did not die in an accident. The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The world narrowed down to 7 words that changed everything. Savannah spoke first, her lawyer's mind automatically seeking clarification even as her hands began to tremble. What do you mean the fire that killed Thomas and Grace Holloway in September 1997 was not caused by faulty wiring? It was arson. It was murder. And the person who ordered it was Warren Kensington, the sheriff of this county. His son Vance helped carry it out. Nolan's face had gone pale. His fingers froze above his keyboard. How do you know this? Dorothy closed her eyes. When she opened them, 25 years of silence poured out like water through a broken dam. Because your father told me. 3 months before the fire, Thomas came to see me. He had found financial records at Kensington Construction showing that Warren Kensington was embezzling $2 million. He did not trust the local police because the sheriff was the thief. He did not know where to turn. So he came to me, his old Sunday school teacher, the woman who had known his mother, the person in this town who never turned anyone away. Dorothy's voice cracked, but she kept going. The way a soldier keeps marching even when every step is agony, because stopping is not an option, because the people behind you are counting on you to lead. He gave me a box, documents, copies of everything he had found. He said if anything happened to him, I should make sure the right people saw it. I thought he was being paranoid. I thought he was exaggerating the danger. 3 months later, your house burned down with your parents inside. And I knew. I knew Warren Kensington had killed them to protect his secret. The silence that followed was the worst kind, full of 25 years of grief being rearranged, full of childhoods being re-examined through a lens of murder instead of accident, full of the sound of 3 hearts breaking in ways that could never be fully repaired. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden deck. He walked to the railing, gripped it hard enough that his knuckles went white. His back was to them, but Jack could see his shoulders shaking. You knew, Ethan said. His voice was barely controlled, a surgeon's voice trained to stay steady when everything inside was screaming. You knew for 25 years that our parents were murdered, and you never told us. I was afraid, Dorothy whispered. God help me, Ethan, I was terrified. You were children, 7, 9, and 11 years old. Warren Kensington had already killed 2 people to protect his secrets. If I came forward with that evidence, if I showed it to anyone, he would have come for me. And for you, all 3 of you. I could not lose you too. I'd already lost your parents because I did not take Thomas seriously enough. I was not going to lose their children because I was not careful enough. Nolan had closed his laptop. His hands were flat on the table, pressing down hard, as if he needed the physical contact with something solid to keep himself from flying apart. So what did you do? I reported Warren for harassment, enough to get him investigated, enough to get him removed from power. He went to federal prison for corruption. But I never showed the evidence of the murder. I never risked your lives for justice that might not have come anyway. Not with Warren's connections, not with the local courts in his pocket. I chose your safety over your parents' justice. She looked at each of them in turn. Her grandchildren, the children she had raised with love and fear in equal measure. The children she had protected at a cost only she understood. I am not asking you to forgive me, Dorothy said. I am not sure I deserve forgiveness, but I need you to understand why. I need you to know that every decision I made was because I loved you more than I loved being right, more than I loved justice, more than I loved my own peace of mind. Savannah had been quiet, processing, her legal mind cataloging facts, building timelines, assessing implications. But beneath the professional exterior, Jack could see the child she had once been. The little girl in pajamas who had watched 3 strangers walk into her grandmother's house on Christmas Eve and wondered if the world still had room for kindness. Where is the evidence now? Savannah asked. Dorothy told them everything. The 3 sets of copies, the bank in Phoenix, the lawyer in Tucson, the sealed envelope at the Phoenix Tribune, the bait box under the floorboards. 25 years of preparation laid out with the precision of a general revealing a battle plan that had been decades in the making. The 3 siblings stared at their grandmother, at this 88-year-old woman who had spent a quarter-century building an insurance policy so elaborate and so patient that the man who wanted to destroy her had never seen it coming. You planned for this, Nolan said. His voice had changed. The shock was still there, but something else had joined it, something that looked like awe. I survived for this. There is a difference. I did not want any of it. But I knew someday the Kensingtons would come back, and I was not going to let them win. Not after what they did to your parents, not after what they took from you. Ethan turned around. His face was a battlefield. Grief and anger and love, and something that defied naming fought for dominance across his features. When he spoke, his voice was raw but steady. You should have told us. We deserve to know. Yes, you did. And I am sorry I waited so long. But I would make the same choice again, Ethan. I would choose your safety over everything else every time. That is what your parents would have wanted. That is what being a grandmother means. Ethan crossed the porch in 3 steps and wrapped his arms around Dorothy so carefully it looked like he was holding something infinitely precious and infinitely breakable. She buried her face in his chest and for the first time in 25 years allowed herself to cry without trying to hide it. The deep shaking sobs of someone finally letting go of a weight they had carried so long, it had become part of them. Nolan and Savannah joined them, 4 people standing on a sagging porch in the early morning light, holding each other together the way they had been holding each other together since the night their world first burned. Jack stepped back. This was their moment, their family, their grief and their healing. He walked down the porch steps, leaving them to their private reckoning, and found Duke and Preacher waiting by the front gate. Duke took one look at Jack's face and understood. She told them, "Yeah, how bad? The worst thing you can tell someone, that the people they loved were murdered, and the person who raised them knew all along." Preacher's jaw tightened. His hand went to the small cross he wore around his neck. The gesture of a man who believed in justice, divine and otherwise, and had just been reminded that sometimes justice arrives 25 years late. "What do we do now?" Duke asked. "We do what we came here to do. We protect that family, and we make sure Vance Kensington pays for what he did." The next 6 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Nolan worked with a focus that burned like fever, cross-referencing the documents from Dorothy's box with public records he could access legally. Employment records for Thomas Holloway at Kensington Construction. Financial filings that showed discrepancies matching the embezzlement Dorothy had described. Building inspection reports from the Holloway house that had been filed and sealed suspiciously fast after the fire. The hacked emails he had found on the Kensington backup server could not be used in court. But they were a map. They told him exactly where to dig through legitimate channels, exactly which documents to request, exactly which threads to pull, until the whole rotten tapestry began to unravel. Savannah made calls, sent emails, leveraged every professional relationship she had built in a decade of practicing law. Her voice was sharp, persuasive, relentless. She had spent her career fighting for justice in courtrooms across California. Now she was fighting for her own family. And there was a difference in her voice that even the people on the other end of the phone could hear. This was personal. And personal meant she would not stop until it was done. Ethan stayed with Dorothy. He checked her blood pressure, which was too high, made her eat, which she did not want to do, sat with her on the porch and held her hand while she told him stories about his parents that she had never shared before. Stories that had been locked away with the secret too painful to tell without the truth coming with them. "Your father loved to sing in the shower," Dorothy said, her eyes distant with memory. Terrible voice. Just awful. But he sang like nobody was listening every morning at the top of his lungs. And your mother would stand outside the bathroom door laughing so hard she could not breathe. Ethan listened, absorbed every word like a man dying of thirst being handed water. These were not just stories. They were pieces of parents he had been too young to remember clearly, pieces that had been stolen from him, pieces being returned one by the woman who had kept them safe all these years. By mid-afternoon, they had company. 2 black SUVs pulled up to the perimeter, federal plates. 4 agents emerged, led by a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by anything. Special Agent Ruth Calloway. FBI. Savannah met her at the edge of the property, Jack and Duke flanking her like bodyguards. The rest of the bikers maintained their positions. Watchful but not threatening. Ms. Holloway, Agent Calloway said, shaking Savannah's hand with a grip that suggested she had spent years in the field before rising to administration. "You said you had evidence of a 25-year-old murder connected to ongoing criminal activity." "I am listening." They convened in Dorothy's living room. The space felt too small for what was about to happen. History being made in a room that still smelled like the bacon Dorothy had cooked that morning. Nolan presented his findings with the clarity of someone who had spent years explaining complex technical concepts to people who did not understand computers. But this time there was emotion beneath the technical precision. This was not just data. This was his parents. The agents listened, asked questions, took notes. Agent Calloway's expression remained neutral, professional. But Jack saw the moment she realized this was real, saw the moment she understood they had something solid. Dorothy then presented her own evidence. The original box, the key to the safe deposit box, the name and contact information of the lawyer in Tucson, The details of the sealed envelope at the Phoenix Tribune. 25 years of preparation laid out with methodical precision. Agent Calloway sat back and looked at Dorothy for a long old time. Then she looked at Savannah. This is remarkable preliminary work. If even half of this checks out through our own investigation, we are looking at multiple federal charges. Murder, conspiracy, corruption, wire fraud from the embezzlement, possibly RICO violations if we can connect it to ongoing criminal enterprise. Can you protect Mrs. Hargrove? Jack asked. We can arrange protective measures, but I am concerned about the 300 potential witnesses camped outside. If Kensington decides to escalate, you have given him a target-rich environment. My brothers can handle themselves, Jack said. I'm sure they can, but can they handle themselves against hired professionals? Because that is what Kensington will bring if he feels cornered. Jack met her eyes. He recognized the look, the assessment of one veteran by another. She was not dismissing them. She was being realistic. We have been to war, Agent Calloway. Most of these men have. We know the difference between bravery and stupidity. We will be ready. Calloway stood. Here is what is going to happen. My team will verify this evidence through proper legal channels. We will build a case that holds up in court. And when we are ready, we will arrest Vance Kensington and anyone else involved. But that is going to take time. We do not have time, Savannah said. The eviction order goes into effect tomorrow morning. Then we get an emergency stay. I will call the federal courthouse now. This property is part of an active federal investigation. Nobody is getting evicted until we sort this out. Relief washed over Jack so intensely he had to grip the arm of the couch. They had done it. They had bought time. Maybe enough time to finish this properly. But Vance Kensington was not going to go quietly. Jack knew that the way he knew his own name. Men like Vance did not surrender. They burned everything down and walked away through the ashes. 3 blocks away in an executive office, overlooking what he considered his town, Vance Kensington received a phone call that changed everything. The FBI has filed for an emergency stay on the Hargrove eviction. His attorney's voice carried the careful neutrality that always preceded catastrophic news. They are claiming the property as part of an active federal investigation. I am hearing that old cases are being reopened, cases involving your father. Vance stood, walked to his window, looked down at the town that should have been his kingdom, his legacy, his father's vindication. He made 3 calls. The first was to a private security firm that did not ask questions as long as the check cleared. 8 men, tactical experience, available within 4 hours. The second was to a man who specialized in making evidence disappear. Hard drives wiped, documents shredded, servers destroyed, clean and untraceable. The third was to his father's old contacts in law enforcement, the ones who still owed Warren Kensington favors, the ones who understood that loyalty outlasted legality. By the time Vance hung up from the 3rd call, he had made his decision. The old woman had kept something hidden in that house for 25 years. If the FBI was investigating, that meant someone had found it or was close to finding it. The evidence had to be destroyed. The house had to be destroyed. And anyone who stood in the way had to understand the cost of interference. The confrontation came at sunset. Vance's black Mercedes pulled up to the perimeter. But this time, he did not come alone. 4 SUVs followed, disgorging 8 men in tactical gear. Professionals. The kind of men who had been to the same wars as Jack and his brothers, just on a different payroll. Vance emerged from his Mercedes wearing a suit that cost more than most of the motorcycles parked around Dorothy's house. He walked right up to where Duke and 20 other bikers stood in formation. And for the first time since this started, there was no pretense of civility. I want to speak to Jack Mercer, Vance called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to giving orders and having them obeyed. Jack emerged from Dorothy's house. The cough that had been building all day rattled through him as he descended the porch steps, but he kept his movement steady, controlled. He walked to meet Vance. 20 feet separated them, an ocean of bad history and worse intentions. Mr. Kensington, Jack said, what can I do for you? You can get your biker gang out of my town. You can stop interfering with a legal business transaction. And you can go back to whatever hole you crawled out of and die quietly like you are supposed to. Behind Vance, his hired soldiers shifted slightly. Behind Jack, 297 bikers went very still. The kind of stillness that comes right before violence erupts. That is not going to happen, Jack said calmly. Do you know who I am? Vance's voice rose, anger cracking through the polished exterior like fault lines in expensive marble. Do you know what I can do? I own this town. I own the police. I own the judges. You are nothing but a dying old man playing hero for a woman who does not even matter. She matters to me. Why, the question came out like an accusation. Why do you care so much about some old woman? What is she to you? She is the person who saved my life when no one else would. She is the person who showed me what grace looks like, what strength looks like, what being human actually means. Jack took a step forward. The hired soldiers tensed, but Jack ignored them. And she is the grandmother of 3 children your father orphaned when you burned their house down. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. Vance's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, shock, fear, then calculation. The look of a man who just realized the walls were closing in and was already figuring out how to tear them down before they crushed him. I do not know what you are talking about, Vance said, but his voice had changed. The bravado was gone. Yes, you do. Thomas and Grace Holloway, September 1997. You were home from college. Your father asked you to handle a problem, and you handled it with gasoline and a match. 2 people dead, 3 children orphaned, and 25 years of walking free while a woman you thought was just a helpless old lady was building a case so airtight you will never see daylight again. That is impossible. Vance's composure cracked further. There is no evidence. There was never any evidence. Thomas Holloway gave Dorothy the evidence before you killed him. Financial records, documents, everything your father stole, and everything connecting him to the murder. And Dorothy did not just hide it under her floorboards like some frightened old woman. She made copies, 3 sets, stored in 3 different locations, a bank, a lawyer, a newspaper. Every one of them with instructions to release everything if anything happens to her or her home. Jack watched the information hit Vance like physical blows. Each revelation another crack in the foundation of the life he had built on murder and silence. You have nothing, Vance said, but his voice was hollow now. The voice of a man who had just watched his entire future collapse. The FBI has everything. Special Agent Ruth Calloway and her team are going through the evidence right now. Every email your father thought he deleted. Every financial record you thought was buried. By morning, you are going to have federal agents at your door with arrest warrants. Vance stood there for a long moment. His hired soldiers shifted uncomfortably behind him. 8 men against 300. The math was simple and it did not favor them. Then Vance's expression hardened into something ugly. Something that looked exactly like his father must have looked when he realized Dorothy Hargrove had destroyed him. You have made a mistake, Vance said quietly. You have made an enemy you cannot afford to have. You think the FBI protects you? You think those badges mean anything? My family has been in this state for 3 generations. We have friends in places you cannot imagine. And before this is over, you are going to wish you had died in that garage 3 months ago instead of dragging yourself here to play hero. Jack took another step forward, close enough now that Vance's soldiers raised their weapons slightly, making their presence known. I have made lots of enemies over the years, Vance. Most of them are dead now. The rest wish they were. Jack's voice dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. Here is the thing about dying men. We are not afraid anymore. We have got nothing to lose and nothing to prove except that we did not waste the time we were given. And I am going to spend my last days making sure you pay for what you did. That those 3 children get the justice they deserve. That Dorothy gets to live in peace. And if that means I die tomorrow instead of next month, so be it. Because at least I will die knowing I did something that mattered. Vance turned without another word, got into his Mercedes. His hired soldiers backed toward their SUV's weapons, still half raised, not taking their eyes off the sea of bikers until they were behind armor and glass. The convoy pulled away, leaving rubber on the asphalt. The sound of engines fading into the distance like a retreating army that would definitely be back. Duke appeared at Jack's shoulder. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. He needed to know we know. That there is no way out for him now. Cornered animals are dangerous, Duke. But they are also predictable. They run or they fight. Which one do you think Kensington will choose fight? Men like Vance Kensington do not run. They have spent their whole lives believing they are untouchable. He will try to destroy the evidence, try to destroy us, try to burn everything down before the FBI can close the net. So we prepare for war. We have been at war since we got here, brother. Now we are just fighting it on different ground. That night, Jack could not sleep. His breathing had become shallow and labored, each inhale requiring conscious effort. Ethan had given him medication strong enough to drop a horse, but Jack had only taken half the prescribed dose. He needed to stay alert, stay sharp. This was the end game, and he could not afford to be foggy when Vance made his move. He sat on Dorothy's porch in the darkness, watching his brothers maintain their vigil. Organized, disciplined, an army of aging warriors who had come when called because that was what you did for family. The screen door opened behind him. Dorothy emerged wrapped in a shawl despite the mild temperature, moving with the shuffling steps of someone whose body had long since betrayed them, but whose spirit refused to acknowledge it. "Cannot sleep?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him with a small sigh of relief. "Sleep is overrated." She sat beside him, and for a while they just existed together in comfortable silence. The kind of silence that only comes when two people have been through enough that words become optional. "How did they take it?" Jack asked. "After I left this morning. How were they really?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Ethan was angry. Not at me, though I think part of him wanted to be. Angry at the situation. Angry at the years lost. Angry at the injustice of it all. He went for a walk, came back calmer. He is a surgeon. He knows how to compartmentalize. But I could see it aged him. Right there in front of me, I watched my grandson get older. And Nolan went to his computers. That is how he processes things. Through data, through problems he can solve. He is already building a secondary case file backup evidence organized 7 different ways. He said he would not sleep until it was done. I believe him. Savannah cried. Dorothy's voice broke slightly. My strong, fierce, brilliant Savannah, who argues cases in front of federal judges, without blinking, sat on the kitchen floor and cried like she was 11 years old again. And then she stood up, washed her face, and started making phone calls. She had a plan within an hour. 4 backup plans within 2. She is her mother's daughter. Grace was the same way. Fell apart in private, rebuilt herself in public. Unbreakable. Jack looked at the stars. Same stars he had watched from the side of Route 66 25 years ago, when he had been ready to let them be the last thing he ever saw. "They forgave you," he said. "It was not a question. They told me they understood. I am not sure that is the same thing as forgiveness, but it is a start. It is more than a start, Mrs. Hargrove. It is everything." The attack came at 3 in the morning. No warning, no dramatic buildup. Just a sudden eruption of violence that anyone who had seen combat recognized instantly. The switch from peace to war in the space of a heartbeat. Molotov cocktails arced through the darkness. Bottles filled with gasoline and malice trailing fire like comets falling from a vengeful sky. They crashed into the empty lot where some of the bikes were parked, exploding into pools of flame that licked up into the night sky and painted everything in shades of orange and red. Jack was on his feet before conscious thought kicked in. Instincts honed by decades of staying alive taking over. Around him, 297 other men were doing the same. No panic, no confusion, just immediate organized response. "Fire teams go," Duke's voice boomed across the encampment. Men grabbed extinguishers, formed bucket brigades, attacked the flames with the efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this scenario. Security perimeter tightened. Preacher was coordinating the other side, making sure this was not a diversion for something worse, making sure Vance was not using the fire as cover for something more deadly. Jack ran for Dorothy's house, his lungs screaming in protest. Found Ethan already there, getting Dorothy and his siblings out through the back door, moving them to the predetermined safe location they had established the day before. "Is everyone out?" Jack demanded. "Everyone is accounted for," Ethan confirmed. One hand steadying Dorothy, the other checking the perimeter. "What is happening?" Kensington's opening move. "He is trying to scatter us. Make us choose between protecting the bikes and protecting Dorothy." But there was something else happening too. In the chaos and the noise and light of the fires, Jack caught movement near the back of Dorothy's house. A shadow that did not belong. Someone moving with professional precision toward the rear entrance. Duke, Jack said into the radio. Someone is approaching Dorothy's house from the back. During the distraction, they are going for the box. Copy. I see him. Duke's voice was tight. One man, black clothing, professional movement. He is already at the back door. Do not let him get in. Too late. He is inside. Jack's mind raced. The box was in there. The bait was in there. And if Vance's man took it, Vance would think he had won, would think the evidence was destroyed, would not know about the copies until it was too late, actually. Jack stopped. Let him take it. Duke's voice crackled back. Say again, let him take the box. Dorothy planned for this. The box is bait. Let Kensington think he won. Let him think the evidence is destroyed. It will make him careless. And careless men make mistakes. A pause, then Duke's low chuckle came through the radio. That old woman is something else. Yes, she is. They watched through the darkness as the shadow emerged from Dorothy's house, carrying a small wooden box. Watched him disappear into the night, moving toward a vehicle parked 3 blocks away with its lights off. Watched the tail lights flare and vanish down a side street. The fires were under control within 10 minutes. Minimal damage. 3 motorcycles with scorched paint. Some camping equipment singed. A tent that would need replacing. Nothing that could not be fixed or replaced. But the real victory was invisible. Somewhere in the darkness, a man was delivering a box to Vance Kensington. A box that contained real documents, real evidence, but was only 1 copy of 4. A box that Vance would open with triumph, believing he had destroyed the only proof of his crimes. The final piece of a trap, 25 years in the making. Sheriff Tanner showed up 20 minutes later, lights flashing, looking exhausted and angry. What happened here, he demanded. Firebombing, Jack said. Someone threw Molotov cocktails at our camp, professional job. And while we were dealing with the fire, someone broke into Mrs. Hargrove's house. Broke in, Tanner's expression sharpened. Was anything taken? A box, Jack met the sheriff's eyes. A box that Dorothy Hargrove has been keeping safe for 25 years. A box containing evidence that Vance Kensington's father embezzled $2 million from his own company and that Vance himself murdered 2 people to cover it up. Tanner stared at him, the pieces clicking into place behind his eyes. The Holloway fire. Yes, that was ruled accidental. It was ruled accidental because the sheriff at the time was Warren Kensington, and Warren Kensington ordered the fire. Tanner ran a hand over his face, looked at the smoldering remains of the attack, at the 300 men standing in organized rows waiting, at Dorothy's house with its back door hanging open. The FBI is already involved, Jack continued. Agent Ruth Calloway, Phoenix Field Office. She has the full evidence package. What Vance stole tonight is only 1 copy. There are 3 others in secure locations. He thinks he has won. He has not. Tanner pulled out his phone, stepped away to make a call. Jack watched him, saw the moment confirmation came through, saw the sheriff's posture change from local lawman to something harder, something with purpose. When Tanner came back, his demeanor had transformed completely. She confirmed everything, said the warrants are being finalized, should have them by morning. He looked at Jack with a respect that had not been there before. You people planned this. The box. Letting them take it. All of it. Dorothy planned it. 25 years ago, she started building a case she hoped she would never have to use. We are just here to make sure she gets to finish it. Tanner nodded slowly. I am posting deputies around this property for the rest of the night. Anyone tries anything else, they go through law enforcement first. He started toward his car, then stopped. Mr. Mercer, thank you for doing what the rest of us should have done a long time ago. Jack watched him go, felt the exhaustion pulling at him like doubled gravity, tasted copper at the back of his throat and knew what it meant. But he also felt the quiet satisfaction of a plan coming together. The knowledge that Dorothy's decades of patience were about to pay off. He found Dorothy in the safe location, a neighbor's reinforced basement that Preacher had identified as the most defensible position within the perimeter. She was sitting in a folding chair, wrapped in a blanket, looking impossibly small and impossibly strong at the same time. They took the box, Jack told her. Dorothy nodded. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. The smile of a chess player who has just watched her opponent take the poisoned pawn. Good, she said. Let him have it. Let him think it is over. Let him sleep well tonight. Because tomorrow, Vance Kensington learns what it means to underestimate an old woman who has had 25 years to prepare for this exact moment. The trap was never the box. The trap was everything around the box. The copies, the lawyer, the newspaper, the FBI, 300 men standing guard, and one dying man who came back to honor a debt. She looked at Jack with eyes that held 25 years of patience and fierce, unbreakable love. The trap was always love Jack. That is the one thing men like Vance never understand. They think power is money and influence and hired soldiers. They do not know that real power is a woman who loves 3 children enough to carry a secret for a quarter century. Real power is a man who rides through the night because someone showed him kindness once. Real power is 300 strangers who show up because that is what family does. Jack sat down beside her, took her hand, felt her pulse steady and strong despite everything. You are the bravest person I have ever known, Mrs. Hargrove. I am just a woman who kept her promises. Same as you. Outside the camp settled back into watchful quiet. Damaged equipment was cleared. Patrols resumed. The night continued its patient revolution toward dawn. And somewhere across town, Vance Kensington opened a wooden box and smiled at documents he believed were the only evidence of his crimes. He poured himself expensive whiskey, burned the papers one by one in his fireplace, watched them curl and blacken and turn to ash. He slept well that night, the sleep of a man who believed he had won. It would be the last good sleep he would ever have. As the sun rose on the final day before the eviction order was supposed to take effect, Jack stood in the center of what had become a fortified compound. 300 motorcycles gleaming in the early light, 297 bikers tired but unbroken, 4 FBI agents coordinating with 6 county deputies, all surrounding one small wooden house where an 88-year-old woman had once opened her door to strangers and changed the course of all their lives. Agent Calloway approached phone in hand, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who had just received very good news. We have got the warrants, she announced, and federal judge signed off an hour ago. We are moving on Vance Kensington's home and office simultaneously. But there is a complication. Jack waited. Kensington's security team. The 8 men he brought in yesterday. We have identified them. Former military contractors. Dishonorable discharges, most of them. The kind of men who take jobs that do not have paperwork. They are still in town, still on his payroll, and based on communications we have intercepted, they have been given instructions to prevent anyone from reaching Kensington until he has had time to clean house, which means he is destroying evidence right now, which means we need to move fast. But I need your people to stay here and stay safe. The last thing I need is a confrontation between 300 bikers and 8 armed mercenaries. We will hold position, Jack said. But if those mercenaries come here, if they threaten Dorothy or her family, we will defend ourselves. Calloway studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Understood. But let us try to do this without anyone getting killed. She turned to her team, started issuing orders with crisp efficiency. 2 agents would accompany the county deputies to Kensington's office. Calloway herself would lead the team to his residence. Local police would set up roadblocks on the 3 main routes out of town. Jack watched the federal vehicles pull away, sirens silent, moving fast. Then he turned to Duke. He is not going to sit there and wait for them. You know that? Duke nodded. Man like Kensington, when the walls close in, he does not surrender. He runs. And if he cannot run, he fights. And if he cannot fight, he burns everything down so nobody else gets to win either. Preacher joined them, his face carved from the same stone as the desert around them. I have been listening to the police scanner. Kensington's security team split up about 20 minutes ago. 4 of them went to his office, but the other 4 are unaccounted for. They left his residence before the FBI team was in position. 4 armed professionals, location unknown. Jack felt the familiar cold clarity of tactical thinking settle over him. The same clarity that had kept him alive through 3 tours and 1,000 decisions that mattered. Where would you go if you were Kensington and you had 4 armed men and nothing left to lose? Duke answered without hesitation. I would come here. One last shot at Dorothy, one last shot at the woman who started all of this. If he cannot win, he makes sure she does not either. Revenge is all he has left. Get everyone into defensive positions. Jack's voice shifted into the command tone that 297 men recognized instantly. Women and children in the reinforced basement, Dorothy and her grandchildren with them. Armed watch on every approach. Nobody gets within 200 yards of this house. Duke moved, Preacher moved. The camp transformed in minutes from a settled encampment into a defensive perimeter that would have made any military commander proud. Men who had spent decades as civilians remembered in their bones what they had learned in uniform. Fields of fire, overlapping coverage, communication protocols, the geometry of protection. Jack found Dorothy in the kitchen. She was making coffee. Of course she was making coffee. The world could be ending, and Dorothy Hargrove would make sure everyone had a hot cup before the apocalypse. "Ma'am, we need you in the basement." Dorothy set down the coffee pot, looked at him with those unflinching eyes. "He is coming, is he not?" "We think so." His security team split up. 4 of them are unaccounted for. We think they might be headed here. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she untied her apron, folded it neatly, and set it on the counter. The gesture was so ordinary, so domestic, that it broke Jack's heart. A woman putting away her apron before walking into the last battle of her life. "I am not hiding in a basement," she said. "Mrs. Hargrove, please." "Jack," she turned to face him fully. "I have spent 25 years hiding, 25 years living in fear, 25 years keeping secrets and looking over my shoulder and wondering if today was the day they would come for me. I am done hiding. If Vance Kensington wants to face me, he can face me right here, in my kitchen, in my home, the home my husband built, the home where I raised 3 children, the home I have been fighting for since before that man was old enough to know what hate was." Ethan appeared in the doorway. "Grandma Dot, Jack is right. We need you somewhere safe." "I am safe," Dorothy said with a firmness that allowed no argument. "I have 300 men outside my door. I have the FBI on its way. I have 3 grandchildren who turned out better than I had any right to hope. And I have Jack Mercer, who rode through the night to honor a debt that was paid in full 25 years ago." She reached up and touched Jack's face the same way she had on the porch the night he arrived, the same way she had touched him that Christmas morning in 1997. "I am the safest I have ever been." Jack covered her hand with his own, felt the tremor in her fingers, felt the steel beneath it. "Then at least stay away from the windows." "Please," Dorothy smiled. "That much I can do." Nolan came running in from the spare room. His face was flushed, and his eyes were bright with the particular intensity of someone who had just discovered something critical. "The FBI hit Kensington's office," he said, but he was not there. His people stalled the agents with lawyers while Kensington went out the back. "Sheriff Tanner is tracking his vehicle. He is headed this direction." "How long?" "Maybe 15 minutes. And Jack, there is something else." Nolan held up his laptop. "I intercepted a communication between Kensington and his security team. He is not just coming here. He has got a plan. The 4 unaccounted men are already in position around the perimeter. They have been here for at least an hour. They moved in during the shift change when our patrols had a gap." Jack felt his blood freeze. Inside the perimeter. Inside the perimeter. Nolan's voice was steady, but his hands were not. "They are carrying incendiary devices. Same setup as last night, but bigger. Professional grade. Thermite charges. The kind that burn hot enough to melt steel. If they light those inside our camp, the motorcycles, the fuel tanks, the camping equipment, it all goes up. And anyone standing near it goes with it. How many of our people are at risk if they hit the main parking area? Dozens. Maybe more." Jack moved. Pain forgotten. Cancer forgotten. Everything forgotten except the cold, hard geometry of saving lives. He grabbed the radio. "All units, this is Jack. We have 4 hostiles inside the perimeter carrying incendiary devices. I repeat, inside the perimeter. Check your sectors. Find them. Do not engage unless necessary. Priority is getting our people away from the fuel and the bikes. Move everyone to the safe zones." Now the camp erupted into controlled motion. Men who had been sitting, waiting, suddenly had a mission, a purpose, something tangible to fight. They moved with the discipline of soldiers because that is what they were. That is what they had always been. Duke's voice came over the radio. "North sector, I have eyes on one. Black clothing, tactical vest, moving toward the main bike formation. He is carrying a satchel, probably the charges. Do not let him reach the bikes. Contain, but do not engage unless he tries to detonate. Copy that. Preacher's voice next. East sector. Got another one. He is already at the secondary parking area. He is setting something up. I can see wires. Preacher, do you have a clean approach? Affirmative. I can reach him in 30 seconds. Take him down. Non-lethal if possible. But do not let him complete that circuit. On it. Jack stood on Dorothy's porch directing the operation the way he had directed operations in another lifetime. In another desert. When the stakes had been just as high and the margin for error just as thin. His breathing had become ragged, each word into the radio, costing him something he could not afford to spend. But he spent it anyway because that was what leaders did. They spent themselves so others did not have to. South sector, another voice. One of the newer brothers, a man Jack knew only as Shepherd. I have the third one. He is near the cooking area, the propane tanks. Do not let him near those tanks, Shepherd. Whatever you have to do. Understood. That left one. 4 hostiles, 3 located. Where was the 4th? Jack scanned the darkness. The camp was lit by emergency lanterns, now pools of yellow light surrounded by deep shadows. Perfect conditions for someone who knew how to move unseen. Then he saw it. Movement near the house. Coming from the side yard, using the old oak tree as cover, moving with the fluid precision of someone who had done this 100 times before. The 4th man was not going for the bikes. He was going for Dorothy. Jack moved off the porch. His body screamed at him. His lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. Every step was an act of pure will muscle and bone obeying commands that the cancer was doing everything it could to countermand. He rounded the corner of the house and came face to face with the 4th man. 6 feet tall, body armor, night vision pushed up on his forehead, hands holding an incendiary charge. Thermite. The kind of thing that would turn a wooden house into an inferno in less than 60 seconds. For a moment, they just looked at each other. 2 men who had both been trained by the same military machine, standing on opposite sides of a line drawn by money and morality. Walk away, Jack said. His voice was quiet, steady, the voice of a man who had nothing left to fear. Whatever he is paying you, it is not enough. It is never enough. The man hesitated. Jack could see the calculation in his eyes, the assessment. Old man, sick, barely standing, easy to push past. But there was something else in the man's eyes too. Recognition, not of Jack specifically, of what Jack was. A soldier, a man who had served, a man who carried himself with a particular gravity that only comes from having been tested in the worst ways possible and refusing to break. You are military, the man said. 30 years, 3 tours. Then you know I have a job to do. I know you have a choice to make. Jack took a step forward. We always have a choice. That is what separates us from the machines we were trained to be. You can light that charge and burn an 88-year-old woman's house down. Kill her grandchildren, kill a dying man who is not worth the ammunition. You can do that, but you will have to live with it every night, every morning, every time you close your eyes. You will see her face, you will hear her voice, and you will know that whatever money Kensington paid you was not worth the piece of your soul you had traded for it. The man's grip on the device tightened, then loosened, tightened again. I have done worse, he said, but his voice had cracked on the last word. So have I, Jack said, and it ate me alive. For 6 years, it ate me alive until a woman I had never met opened her door and showed me that I could still be something other than a weapon, that I could still choose, that the worst thing I had ever done did not have to be the last thing I ever did. Jack took another step, close enough now that if the man activated the device, they would both burn. She opened her door for me, a stranger, a dangerous-looking biker on the worst night of the year. She did not know me, did not owe me anything, but she let me in. She saved my life. And I have spent 25 years trying to be worthy of that kindness. The man looked at the device in his hands, looked at Jack, looked at the house behind Jack where the light in the kitchen window meant Dorothy was still making coffee, still taking care of people, still being exactly who she had always been. He set the device on the ground, stepped back. put his hands up. "I am done," he said quietly. "Tell Kensington he can find someone else." Jack exhaled. The breath rattled in his chest. He keyed his radio. "Fourth hostile is neutralized. Stand down. The house is secure." The responses came in rapid succession. Duke had contained his target. Preacher had subdued his without injury. Shepard and 3 other brothers had tackled the third man before he could reach the propane tanks. All 4 incendiary devices recovered. All 4 hostiles in custody. 0 casualties. 0 detonations. 300 men who had just prevented a massacre through disciplined training and the kind of calm under fire that only comes from having faced worse and survived. Jack sat down on Dorothy's back steps. His legs would not hold him anymore. The adrenaline was draining away, and what it left behind was the raw, unfiltered reality of a body that was shutting down. He coughed, tasted copper, knew what it meant. Ethan was there in seconds. Medical bag in hand, stethoscope already around his neck. He knelt beside Jack, checked his pupils, his pulse, his breathing. His face was professionally neutral, but his eyes told the story. "How bad?" Jack asked. "Bad." Ethan's voice was honest. The way a good doctor's voice should be. "You need to be in a hospital. You needed to be in a hospital 3 days ago." "Not yet. Not until this is finished." "Jack, your lungs are filling. You are bleeding internally. If we do not get you treatment in the next few hours, you are not going to make it to tomorrow." Jack looked up at the sky. The stars were fading as dawn approached. Same stars, same sky, same desert that had almost killed him 25 years ago and had been trying to finish the job ever since. Then I had better make the next few hours count. The sound of a single engine broke through the morning quiet. A car, moving fast, coming from the direction of town. Vance Kensington's black Mercedes screamed around the corner of Sycamore Lane and skidded to a stop at the edge of the perimeter. The door opened and Vance tumbled out, looking nothing like the polished executive who had stood here yesterday threatening Jack with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was wild. His eyes held the particular madness of a man who had watched his entire world collapse in the space of a single night. He had burned the documents from the box, had celebrated his victory, had gone to sleep believing he had won, and then the FBI had come to his door at dawn. He had run, past the agents securing his house, through a back entrance his architect had built for exactly this kind of emergency, into his Mercedes, through the streets of a town he thought he owned, toward the only target that still mattered. "Dorothy, where is she?" Vance screamed, stumbling toward the perimeter. "Where is that woman? She destroyed my family. She destroyed everything. My father died in prison because of her. She took everything from us, and now she thinks she can take the rest." The bikers closed ranks, a wall of leather and weathered faces between Vance and the house, not aggressive, not violent, just there, immovable. A human barricade built from brotherhood and the shared understanding that some things were worth standing for. Vance stopped, looked at them, looked at the wall of men who would not move, who could not be bought, who could not be threatened, who could not be burned out or scared away or broken. For the first time, true understanding dawned on his face, the understanding that he had lost. Not because he was outsmarted or outgunned, but because he had underestimated the one thing that no amount of money or power or violence could overcome: people who showed up for each other. The screen door opened. Dorothy walked out onto her porch, slowly, carefully, every step the product of 88 years and the accumulated weight of everything those years had held. She walked to the porch railing and looked down at Vance Kensington. He looked up at her. And in the space between them, 25 years of hatred and fear and guilt and grief and silence stretched taut as wire. "Your father killed those children's parents," Dorothy said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. In the morning stillness, every word carried like a bell. "He killed Thomas and Grace Holloway because Thomas tried to do the right thing. And you helped him. You lit the match. You stood there and watched a house burn with 2 people inside." Vance's face contorted. They should have kept their mouths shut. "My father built this town. He gave people goods. He kept this place alive. And what did Thomas Holloway do? He threatened to destroy all of that over some money, over numbers on a ledger. My father made a decision to protect everything he had built. Your father made a decision to commit murder, and you made the same decision. And then you spent 25 years walking free while 3 children grew up without parents and an old woman lived in fear. Dorothy came down the porch steps, one at a time, each step deliberate, final. The walk of a woman who had reached the end of a very long road and was not going to stop until she had crossed the finish line. I kept your secret, Dorothy said, standing at the bottom of the steps, 5 feet from Vance, separated only by a low fence and the wall of bikers who parted just enough for her to see him clearly. I kept it to protect those children, to keep them safe from you and your father. Every day for 25 years, I woke up knowing that I was letting murderers walk free. Every night I went to sleep wondering if I had made the right choice. Every time I looked at Ethan and Nolan and Savannah, I saw their parents' faces and I asked myself if Thomas and Grace would forgive me for choosing silence over justice. Her voice broke, but only for a moment. Then the steel returned, tempered by decades of endurance. But I also made sure the truth would survive. No matter what happened to me, no matter what you did, the truth is in places you will never find and people you will never reach. And it is going to outlive both of us. Vance lunged toward the fence. 2 bikers caught him before he made it 3 steps, held him with the effortless strength of men who had been restraining stronger opponents their entire lives. You ruined my family, Vance shouted, spittle flying, eyes wild, the mask of civilized wealth and power completely gone, now revealing the ugly, frightened child beneath. My father was a great man. He was building something. And you destroyed it. You and your complaints and your self-righteousness. Your father was a thief and a murderer, Dorothy said quietly. And you are the same. The only difference is that you had enough money to hide it longer. The sound of sirens, growing closer. Multiple vehicles converging from different directions. The FBI agents who had been searching for Vance after his escape, guided by Sheriff Tanner's roadblocks in the inevitable logic that a man consumed by revenge would go to the object of that revenge. Agent Calloway's SUV was the first to arrive. She stepped out with the contained urgency of someone who had been afraid this moment would end in blood and was relieved to find it had not. Vance Kensington, you are under arrest. The charges were read with the practiced cadence of federal authority. 2 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, arson, corruption, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation. Each charge another link in a chain that would hold him for the rest of his natural life. Vance fought the handcuffs, screamed threats, promised retribution. The agents handled him with professional indifference. They had arrested men like this before. Men who believed their money made them immortal. Men who discovered too late that handcuffs fit the same regardless of the price of the risks they closed around. As they put him in the back of the federal vehicle, Vance pressed his face against the window and stared at Dorothy. His eyes were no longer wild. They were empty. The eyes of a man who had just realized that the 25-year war was over and he had lost. Dorothy watched the vehicle pull away, watched it turn the corner, watched it disappear. Then her legs gave out. Jack caught her. Despite his own body failing, despite the blood he could taste, and the labored breathing that had become his constant companion, he caught her, lowered her gently into the rocking chair on her porch, held her hand while she shook with the release of 25 years of tension, leaving her body all at once. Ethan was there. Nolan. Savannah. They surrounded her the way they had surrounded her that morning when she told them the truth. A family unit forged not in blood but in something stronger. In choice, in loyalty, in the stubborn refusal to let each other fall. Is it over? Dorothy whispered. It is over, Jack said. She looked at him. At this dying man who had ridden through the night to honor a debt from a quarter-century ago, who had stood between her and fire and mercenaries and a man consumed by generational hatred, who had asked nothing in return except the chance to repay kindness with kindness. Thank you, she said, for coming back. Thank you for opening the door. She closed her eyes, let out a breath that seemed to carry the weight of decades. And for the first time in 25 years, Dorothy Hargrove rested, really rested. The kind of rest that only comes when the fear is finally gone, and the fight is finally over, and the people you love are finally safe. 3 days later, the bikers prepared to leave. They had done what they came to do. The fight was won, the enemy defeated. Justice served. Time to go home. whatever home meant for men who had spent their lives on the road. Jack stood on Dorothy's porch watching them pack up with military precision, undoing in hours what they had built over days, erasing the temporary city like it had never existed. Except it had existed, and Calvary Springs would remember, would tell the story for generations, would point to this moment and say, this is what brotherhood looks like. This is what family means. Ethan, Nolan, and Savannah stood with him, watching their strange army of saviors prepare to disappear back into their regular lives. How do we thank them? Ethan asked, his voice thick with emotion. You already did, Jack said. You gave them a reason to remember why they served, why they sacrificed, why brotherhood matters. That is worth more than money. That is worth more than anything. One by one, the bikers came to say goodbye to Dorothy. Each one shook her hand or hugged her gently or just nodded with the kind of respect usually reserved for generals and presidents. She stood there taking it all in. This tiny woman who had become the center of something larger than any of them had anticipated. When Duke's turn came, he knelt down so he was eye level with Dorothy, this massive man making himself small in the presence of true greatness. Ma'am, it has been an honor protecting you. The honor was mine, Duke. You and all these men. You reminded an old woman that the world still has heroes in it. Not heroes, just men trying to pay back a debt. Then I would say the debt is settled, paid in full, with interest. Duke smiled, kissed her hand like a knight from an old story, stood. He caught Jack's eye and something passed between them. Understanding, acceptance, goodbye. The knowledge that they probably would not see each other again, and that was okay. Because some friendships are complete in a moment and do not need a lifetime to be whole. Preacher was next. He pulled Dorothy into a hug that looked like it might crush her fragile frame, but was gentle as a whisper. As a prayer, you keep being the light, Mrs. Hargrove. World needs it. You too, Preacher. Do not forget that. Do not let the darkness win. He nodded once, firm, final. The nod of a man making a promise he intended to keep. And then it was just Jack and Dorothy on the porch watching the last of the bikes roll away, their thunder fading into the Arizona distance until all that remained was silence and memory and the knowledge that something important had happened here. You are not going with them, Dorothy observed. No, ma'am. Why not? Jack looked at her. This woman who had saved his life twice now, without ever asking for anything in return. Because I am tired, Mrs. Hargrove. Because the road does not call to me anymore. Because I would like to spend whatever time I have left somewhere that feels like home. And this feels like home. It is the closest I have ever gotten. Dorothy nodded slowly. Then she took his hand and led him inside. Then you will stay in the spare room, the one with the heater. You will let Ethan take care of you. And you will let me cook for you until you are sick of my cooking. I could never get sick of your cooking, ma'am. We will see about that. The next 3 weeks were the quietest Jack had known in decades. Time stretched and contracted in strange ways. The way it does when you are dying. Hours felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. Everything was precious and fleeting and eternal all at once. Ethan had taken a leave of absence from the hospital, moved into Dorothy's house to provide medical care as Jack's condition deteriorated. He was a good doctor, a better man, the kind of person who made you believe the world might turn out okay after all. He managed Jack's pain with the skill of someone who understood that comfort mattered more than cure at this stage. Made sure Jack could still sit on the porch, still taste Dorothy's cooking, still watch the desert sky do things with color that no painter could replicate. Nolan and Savannah visited every few days, bringing news of the case against Vance Kensington that was building into something overwhelming and undeniable. A case so airtight that even his expensive lawyers could not find a crack to exploit. The emails Warren Kensington thought he had deleted were recovered from backup servers. Financial records were subpoenaed and verified. The documents Dorothy had stored with the lawyer in Tucson and the bank in Phoenix were entered into evidence. Former employees of Kensington Construction came forward with corroborating testimony emboldened by the arrest, willing to tell truths they had been too frightened to share when the Kensington name still carried power. The arson investigation into the Holloway fire was officially reopened. New forensic analysis of the original evidence preserved in a county warehouse for 25 years revealed accelerant patterns consistent with deliberate ignition at multiple points. The electrical fault theory was formally debunked. Thomas and Grace Holloway's deaths were reclassified from accidental to homicide. Savannah stood in front of the television cameras outside the federal courthouse and read a statement on behalf of her family. Her voice did not waver. Her eyes did not blink. She was her mother's daughter. Fell apart in private. Rebuilt herself in public. Unbreakable. Our parents were Thomas and Grace Holloway, she said. They were good people who tried to do the right thing. They were murdered for it. For 25 years, the truth was hidden by powerful people who believed their money and their connections made them above the law. Today, the truth is free, and our parents can finally rest. Jack watched the broadcast from Dorothy's couch. The same couch where 3 children had slept 25 years ago, piled together for warmth under every blanket Dorothy owned. The same couch where Dorothy had sung lullabies in the freezing dark to make sure those children knew they were loved. Savannah did good, Jack said. Dorothy nodded. She was sitting beside him. She was always sitting beside him these days. Because after 25 years of carrying her secret alone, the simple act of sitting next to someone who knew the truth was a luxury she could not get enough of. She is magnificent, Dorothy said. All 3 of them are. Thomas and Grace would be so proud. They would be proud of you too. Dorothy shook her head. I kept the secret too long. I should have been braver. Should have come forward sooner. You kept 3 children alive. You raised them into extraordinary adults. You built a case that brought a murderer to justice. Jack took her hand. You were brave every single day for 25 years, Mrs. Hargrove. The fact that your bravery was quiet does not make it less. She squeezed his hand. They sat together watching the sunlight move across the living room floor. The same sunlight that had warmed this room for decades. The same sunlight that would continue long after both of them were gone. Jack spent his days on the porch watching the town go about its business. Neighbors who had been too scared to help before now stopped by with food and conversation. The local paper ran a story about the widow and the bikers that got picked up nationally. Donations poured in, more than enough to repair the house and ensure Dorothy would be comfortable for whatever time she had left. Enough to set up a scholarship fund in Thomas and Grace Holloway's names. Enough to do some good in a world that desperately needed it. And every evening, Dorothy would sit beside Jack, and they would watch the sunset paint the desert sky in colors that reminded him why living was worth the effort. Why every breath mattered. Why he had been right to keep going all those years ago when everything in him had wanted to stop. Do you have regrets, Dorothy asked one evening, as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Jack considered the question the way he considered everything now. Carefully, thoroughly, with the awareness that each answer might be one of his last. A few. I wish I had come back sooner. I wish I had told the people I cared about that I cared about them instead of assuming they knew. I wish I had spent less time running from my past and more time building a future. But I am here now, and that counts for something. It counts for everything. They sat together and watched the stars come out. The same stars that had witnessed Jack's lowest moment and his highest. The same stars that did not care about human pain or human triumph, but shone down on both with equal indifference. Can I tell you something, Dorothy said. Always, that night. Christmas Eve, 1997, when you boys showed up on my porch, she paused, gathering words that had waited a long time to be spoken. I almost did not open the door. I stood there behind it, and I thought about all the reasons to say no. 3 strange men, bikers. Late at night, I was alone with 3 small children. Every sensible bone in my body said, keep that door shut. But you opened it. I opened it because of Ethan. He had been standing behind me. I did not know he was there until he tugged on my dress and said, Grandma Dot, they look cold. Can we let them in? He was 7 years old, and he saw 3 men in need while I saw 3 reasons to be afraid. Dorothy looked at Jack with eyes that held the whole complicated history of human kindness. Its costs, its risks, its incomprehensible, stubborn, relentless power. A 7-year-old boy taught me how to be brave that night, and I have been trying to live up to his example ever since. Jack smiled. It hurt to smile. Everything hurt now. But some things were worth the pain. You did more than live up to it. You exceeded it. Every day. For 25 years. So did you, Jack. So did you. On the morning of the fourth week, Jack woke up and knew, the way you know things at the end, the way the body communicates when it is done fighting, when it is ready to lay down arms and accept what comes next. The pain was different now, deeper, more fundamental. Like the cancer had finally reached the part of him that kept the engine running and was slowly, methodically shutting it down. Ethan was there immediately, checking vitals, administering medication, doing everything a doctor could do to ease the transition from this world to whatever comes after. His hands were steady, his eyes were not. "How long?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper now, each word costing something he could not afford. "Hours, maybe a day." Ethan's voice was professionally steady, but his eyes betrayed him. "I am sorry, Jack. Do not be. This is how it was always going to end. I just got to choose where, and I chose here. With family. That is more than I ever thought I would get." Dorothy appeared in the doorway. She leaned heavily on her cane, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had become more obstacle than vehicle. She crossed to the bedside, sat down in the chair Ethan pulled up for her, and took Jack's hand. Her skin was paper thin, translucent almost. Jack could see the blue veins beneath the road map of a life that had covered more distance than most people could imagine. Not in miles, in courage. "I am here, son," she said. "I know. Thank you." "What for?" "For opening that door, for showing me that kindness is not weakness, for proving that one person, one act, one moment of grace can change everything, for giving me 25 years I would not have had, and for letting me spend the last of them here, with you." Dorothy smoothed the blanket across his chest, the gesture of a woman who had spent her life taking care of people and would not stop now just because the person she was taking care of was leaving. "You gave me just as much, Jack Mercer. You showed me that the kindness I put into the world came back, that it mattered, that it reached places I could not see and did things I could not imagine. You showed me that opening that door was the best thing I ever did." Jack felt the edges of the room beginning to soften. The light from the window was warmer than it should have been. Golden, the color of desert sunrises and winter mornings, and the particular shade of hope that only exists in the space between what was and what could be. "Tell Duke and Preacher I said goodbye," Jack said. His voice was fading now, each word requiring more effort than the last. "Tell them the debt is paid. Tell them to keep riding. I will. And tell those 3 kids you raised that their parents would be proud. Tell them that good things came from tragedy. Tell them that love wins. Always. In the end, love always wins." "I will, sweetheart. I will." Nolan and Savannah had arrived sometime in the last hour. Jack had not noticed when. They stood in the doorway with Ethan, 3 adults who had once been 3 children on a couch, 3 orphans, saved by a woman who chose love over fear. They were crying, all 3 of them. The quiet tears of people who understood that what was happening in this room was not just an ending, it was a completion. The room was blurring now. Jack could hear voices from somewhere he could not quite see. Familiar voices. Jensen, who had a kid he never got to meet. Martinez, who could make anyone laugh. Corporal Williams, 19 years old, who had asked if they would make it home for Christmas. They were all there, waiting. The way friends wait when they know you are coming, and there is no rush because, wherever they were, time had stopped being something that mattered. "Am I going to see my mom?" Jack asked, his voice barely a breath now. Dorothy squeezed his hand. Tears ran down her weathered cheeks, but her voice was steady. The voice of a woman who had said goodbye too many times and had learned to do it with grace. "Yes, baby, she is waiting for you, and she is so proud of the man you became. Tell her I am sorry I took so long. She knows, Jack. She knows, and she has been watching you every step of the way." Jack looked at Dorothy one last time, at her face lined with age and grief and love, at her eyes still sharp after all these years, still seeing everything, at her hand in his steady as a heartbeat, warm as a porch light on the coldest night of the year. He saw the door she had opened 25 years ago, saw the light behind her, felt the warmth that had pulled him in from the cold, and he understood finally what that light had been, what it had always been. It was not just a lamp in a window or a heater in a small room or a cup of soup given to a stranger. It was the irreducible, stubborn, unbreakable thing that human beings carry inside them. The thing that makes them open doors when every rational thought says keep them shut. The thing that makes them sing lullabies in freezing rooms and take in children no one else wants and ride 800 miles through the night for someone they have not seen in 25 years. It was love, not the romantic kind, not the easy kind, the hard kind, the kind that costs everything and demands nothing, the kind that opens doors and keeps them open no matter what walks through. Jack closed his eyes, let out one last breath. Let it out slowly, gently, the way you release something precious into the wind, not losing it, returning it. And then he was through the door, and the light was everywhere. He did not die alone. He did not die afraid. He died surrounded by love, having spent his final days doing something that mattered. And in the end, that was everything. 1 year later, on a crisp December morning that felt like a memory of that Christmas so long ago, Dorothy Hargrove stood in her front yard surrounded by Ethan, Nolan, Savannah, and 8 grandchildren who called her Grandma Dot, even though only 3 of them were blood-related. In the yard where 300 motorcycles had once stood vigil, there was now a memorial. Simple, elegant. A stone marker with words carved deep enough to last for generations. Jack Mercer, 1955 to 2022. U.S. Army veteran. He opened no doors, but he answered every call. Every Christmas, without fail, 297 motorcycles would make the pilgrimage to Calvary Springs. They would park in organized rows, these aging warriors who refused to forget. They would share a meal with Dorothy and her growing family. They would tell stories about the man who had brought them together for one last fight, one last stand, one last reminder of what they had all fought for in the first place. And every year as they prepared to leave, Dorothy would stand on her porch and wave goodbye, her memory fading a little more each year, but her smile as bright as ever. Some years she remembered their names, some years she did not, but she always remembered the feeling, always remembered that she was loved, because she had learned what Jack had known all along. That family is not about blood. It is about who shows up when you need them. It is about who stands beside you when the world says stand down. It is about the debts that can never be repaid, only honored. And it is about knowing that when you open your door to strangers in the cold, sometimes you are not just saving them. Sometimes they are saving you right back. The sun set over Calvary Springs, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. And in the fading light, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the distant rumble of motorcycles, and the sound of a door opening, and a woman's voice steady and sure saying the 2 words that had changed everything and would echo through generations. Come in.